I'm Linda van Tilburg for BizNews. The Democratic Alliance wants to force the South African government to arrest President Vladimir Putin should he set foot in South Africa. And joining us is Glynnis Breytenbach, the DA Shadow Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, to talk about the preemptive court action they want to take. Hi, Glynnis.
Hi, how are you?
Well, thank you. So what do you want to compel the South African government to do?
It boils down to us wanting to compel the South African government to arrest Putin in terms of the warrant of arrest issued by the International Criminal Court. But the fact is, we want to compel the South African government to obey their obligations in terms of international law and in terms of South African law. The Rome Statute has been domesticated. We have obligations in our domestic law that support our international obligations, and the South African government has ignored them once before in the Al-Bashir matter, when they aided and abetted Al-Bashir to flee the country in the face of a High Court judgment ordering them to arrest him. So we want to prevent that happening again. So we're approaching the court for a declarator. Yeah.
Was it the granting of diplomatic immunity to the BRICS delegates that you thought were laying the table of Putin's appearance in South Africa?
Well, actually, since his visit has been on the cards, we've been asking parliamentary questions. We've been corresponding with the presidency, trying to find out what their position is going to be, warning them about what their obligations are, both publicly and privately. And they're dodging giving us any information, dodging giving us any answers. So given the history of how they've behaved in the past, we, in any event, have been considering this course of action for some time, busy getting our papers together, busy ensuring that an arrest warrant has been issued by the ICC, which has now been confirmed, and it's in the possession of the South Africans. So the timing of this is good. It happens now that sort of today and late yesterday they started telling us about immunity for the BRICS heads of states. But this was already on the cards, and we would have gone ahead with this regardless. It just happens that they made that announcement now. But this has been we've been working on this application for the past 2 or 3 weeks.
So what steps do you want the government to take?
Well, if Putin comes to South Africa, if he arrives on South African soil, then in terms of our international obligations, which we cannot just abrogate because it suits us, they're real binding international obligations. In terms thereof, we're obliged to give effect to the warrant of arrest issued by the ICC. So what needs to happen is the warrant of arrest has been issued. If he arrives in South Africa, the ICC must immediately transmit a request that he be detained and handed over. And then the South African government is obliged, the South African police, in fact, are obliged to arrest him, detain him, take him to a court where he will be, which will order his detention until he's handed over to a representative of the ICC who will have to escort him back to The Hague.
Well, if you look at what happened to the Al-Bashir case, the South African government eventually said, well, kind of, oops, he's left the country.
Yeah, right. So the South African government, behaved shamefully. It's an embarrassment, it's an international embarrassment. We have, as I've said, obligations under the Rome Statute. We have obligations under our own domesticate law. And South African government ignored their obligations in both those instances. And in the face of a court order to arrest and detain and hand over, they actively assisted Al-Bashir to leave the country from a national key point under the cover of darkness. So we have no reason to expect that they'll behave any better, and that's why we're trying to preempt that kind of activity.
Yeah, but this is sort of, the spotlight is so much on this. Do you think they would get away with the same kind of action?
Well, I suppose theoretically they could get away with it, but the government have been behaving particularly badly of late. So we have these cozy relationships with China and Russia, despite the fact that they're, not nearly as important trading partners as other countries are. We have been playing war games with Russia and China, which is, quite horrendous. And we've ignored our international obligations, and we're not exactly the flavor of the month internationally. We've been greylisted by FATF, and we're certainly running a risk of being excluded from AGOA, and all of those things will have and do have a serious impact on our economy and our economic development. So, our government is playing a dangerous game, and to thumb their nose at their international obligations here again will be extremely, in my view, and in the view of the Democratic Alliance, extremely foolhardy, but also unlawful.
If you say unlawful, international law tends to be sometimes a bit hazy. So would it be unlawful in terms of the Rome Statute, or unlawful in terms of South African legislation?
Well, it's certainly a breach of our international obligations, which as a country we should take seriously. You don't sign up for international obligations if you have no intention of fulfilling them. So it's an obligation that our country should take seriously. We were one of the founding signatories of the Rome Statute, but that law has been domesticated into South African law. So if they thumb their nose at their obligations, they're thumbing their nose also at South African law. So it's unlawful in terms of South African law. A court will in all probability give an order that he be detained and handed over, and if they fail to do that, then they're in breach of South African law. That's serious international repercussions, but also very serious domestic repercussions. We can't allow this to happen again with no consequences, which is why we're being preemptive.
So have you already handed in the application in a Gauteng court?
Yes, it's been filed and it's with the court, and we're waiting for a court date.
So what do you expect the government's reaction to be to this?
Oh, I presume they'll oppose it. They'll in all probability arrive at court with a watered down version of they've granted immunity to the BRICS heads of states. But in fact, in South African law, in the Bashir judgment here, the courts have made it quite clear that you can't abrogate your international obligations by offering immunity, pseudo immunity to anybody, including heads of state. So that argument cannot fly in terms of South African law.
So when would this all happen? When would this come to court?
I'm not sure. It was, these documents were filed today. So we're hoping to get a court date, hoping to know the court date later this week. And it's an urgent matter because it has to happen before the BRICS summit. So, yeah.
So before August?
Yes, certainly before August.
Well, a long time before August. How long do these matters normally take?
Well, our court rolls are full, but for matters such as this, I'm quite sure that we would be getting a date certainly certainly in the course of June or very early in July, if not sooner.
Well, Glynnis Breytenbach from the DA, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day.